This subject is very dear to my heart, specifically talking about institutions, how do they matter? Because even before I really go on to my actual presentation, the catchphrase reset. I think reset is the call of the day. Today we're not talking about resetting the buttons. Also, I think before we reset, it's important that we review, we look back, we review, we reflect, we rethink, then only reset. I think there are a lot of steps before resetting the actual button, specifically as- amidst unprecedented, turbulent times that we live today, in the face of uh, really extreme human hardship. And for the first time, uh, I wouldn't call COVID-19. I actually, when I was reviewing and resetting my button, I thought this is Karuna virus, not COVID, Karuna. In fact, Maha Karuna, compassionate, Maha compassionate, because it has no partiality, it is equal, equitable, interdependent. It's affected all of us across the globe, both developing and developed country, across different age groups, different income groups. This is why reset is very important. Uh, and then, of course, how do they matter now? Institutions. Um, I understand Dash is going to talk about the formalized institutions, institutional actors in the country. Now, if you look at if you look at our own history, recalling again before we resetting, recalling our own human history in Bhutan, even prior to the modern development, modern state-led development, so to speak. If you look at theory of modernization, I think those of you who are taking sociology, you recall theory of modernization is pretty much not our model of development. Theory of modernization is very much Western-led. So West is equivalent to modern. So then there was always the opposite of modern, which is primitive, backward, tribal, etc. You see, or as far as really looking down on your own culture, your own roots. People in the West, they look down on Africa, they look down on East Asia, Asian context. We in Bhutan are very fortunate. We were never invaded or colonized ever since our existence. So we have our roots. So with modern development, we became what you call as assimilated Bhutanese. Assimilated because we have the modern British tongue that we are using now as a command of language, because that's a medium of instruction in school for education and also for administrative and governance purpose. And of course, your inner makeup is so different because that comes from your roots. And this is why the informal institutions. Now, if you look at informal institutions are born out of the sheer need of society. Society's both strategic and practical needs, society's aspirations, and society's values. This is why, if you look at informal institutions, they are also referred to sometimes as self help mechanisms. Right from birth to death, to practical needs like irrigating your paddy field, growing food, farming, harvesting, organizing village festivals, Gyok festivals, Zongkok festivals, building your houses, managing your pasture land, managing cattle in the villages, looking after breeding bulls, so to speak, uh, local marriages, small little festivals, to that of tiny little things like archery matches, kuru matches, devo matches, building hagangs, renovating hagangs, were all completely managed by people, ourselves. There are no written rules, so to speak. The rules are all unwritten. Even as simple as village zomdu or the meeting. Today we talk about meeting, we need agenda, we need circulating the agenda, doing background readings, inviting speakers, reconfirming, cancellation, last minute panic, and rearranging the whole setup, etc. It came as the aftershoot of a so-called modernization theory, modernization development that really came from the West in 1960s, 70s. You see, if you look at Bhutan, I think we survived as a nation state, as a country based on informal institutions. Now I'll present a classic case of from where I live. I've been living in Shari village. I work in Shari, live in Shari. So this is a really rustic country bumpkin speaking. So here in Shari, there are still the unwritten rules of self-help mechanisms or informal institutions, right from organizing village festivals, chokus, annual loche in the villages, managing the chops or the people who are conducting the rituals, to that of looking after sick whenever they're sick in the family, in the villages of Ramna or Diriji or Juka in Sharigyok, there are people who actually organize, take turns to look after the elderly and sick, take also turn to look after the death. Death is a big issue. I'm a devout Buddhist, but our Buddhist death rites are very expensive, financially, emotionally, physically, really, really draining. This is where you look up to your community and you look up to your villages for help and for backup and support in all emotionally, physically, and financially. Here, the people make sure that they offer their physical labor, they offer kind in terms of rice, grains, vegetables, dairy products, arrange chokups, the people who conduct death rites, to that of cremation, which is such another big affair, takes away all your time and resources and energy. And of course, in terms of organizing their own Techu festivals and managing community hagangs. For example, I live very close to a community hagang, managed hagang called Senge Drak. I don't know how many of young people in the audience have been, or probably I'm sure some of you must have visited. It is a age-old ancient heritage. Guru Padma Sambhava blessed place. A lot of great masters been here, and this is a small temple. And people from Jiba village, which just live below Senge Drak. Senge Drak is a cliff monastery dedicated to Dakini, lion-faced Dakini in Sanskrit, Simkha Mukha, or Sengdongma in Dzongkho or Tibetan, classical Tibetan. So people in village take turn to look after this monastery as kinger or caretaker. They also make sure that the annual rituals are actually conducted there. People contribute their labor and cash, depending on how much they can offer. And then 3 years ago, they also recited Sutra Kanjur, really community run for the sake of the greater good of the community, for the country, and for the world. So people collected money in terms of cash, in kind, and organized this festival really well. Kanju or Sutra recitation. Till recently, it is again losing its ground. That's the cons of it. Because in the face of young people leaving the village and only elderly being left, not many people are staying in the village because they're leaving the village for entertainment, for work, migrating outside. So as a result, the community could not manage it any longer now. This is 2020, right? 3 years ago, they could manage it, but now it's being looked after by Paro Rabde. So pros and cons again. Now, if you look at something which is up and running very well, and this research actually went on 20 years ago when I was working for Royal Institute of Management. At that time, we had a program called Decentralization Support Program to support Royal Government's policy of decentralization and community participation. 20 years ago, we were researching on how self-help mechanisms can actually contribute to self-reliance through community ownership, individual ownership of development in Bhutan. These people, ever since modern development, when state intervened in terms of support, people look up to state as provider and themselves as recipient. So there is this prevailing Kitu mindset. Whatever issues, problems are there in the village, you say, oh, Kitu shule shuni mom. Turugi shaktu shule shuni, ngachigi bumuteni. So that's the prevailing mindset. And that mindset is to a certain extent, even today, in terms of lack of ownership, to be really taking your own initiative, owning your own development programs and projects, and towards contributing to sustainable self-reliance, it's still an issue because even today people look up to local government, to the Gyeok offices, Gyeok Sokde, Zongkok Sokdo, including the parliament, to address the issues in the villages. Now, again, looking back at traditional self-help mechanisms, if you look at building, people in the villages are so skilled. They would have both skilled labor, such as the local carpenter, Zo, or they'll have local masonry, Sizo. They'll also have local manual workers or Pazo who are really skilled at ramped earth construction. So they would actually contribute their labor, both skilled and then hire labor within the village and next village, neighboring village, in terms of contributing to building. If the story of Ramna village's Damji Bridge, those of you who've been to Chimpu or who have been to Parozong via the lateral road towards the Paro Museum, you'll see this beautiful bridge, which is now constructed by the government. 30 years ago, it is community owned. So people from Juka, Damji, and Ramna, they actually cooperated and they built the bridge because people shared the pasture land, they shared the field labor, etc. So they really needed to use this bridge for common good. So they really not only built the bridge, but also maintained it. But then, of course, 30 years down the line, you have, thankfully, state support in terms of infrastructure building, modern ways of building bridges. So people lost their skills, they also lost their knowledge. And then the issue of ownership also, because now the bridge is owned, is a state property, it's Zongkok's property, and Zongkok has the owners or ownership to look after the infrastructure. Though people living in the vicinity, people living in the nearby villages do use this bridge. I live in Ramna and I cross this bridge every day when I commute to my office and back. So see, that's sort of again the state-led development and intervention when in some ways it's advantageous in terms of really maintaining high quality infrastructure and less burden on the people. On the other, the ownership of the people, owning their own properties and looking after their own support system in the villages, the self-help mechanism, that's losing ground. Now, during the death rite, for example, 30 years ago, people in Shari could chant Bodhisattva Avalokiteshwara, Chenrezig mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is so popular in Bhutan as a Buddhist country, and which we normally chant when we, of course, when we actually go offer a condolence to a bereaved family, or when there's illness or death. The whole village should come together, console the bereaved family day and night. Some people would take the lead to chant, whoever had melodious voice or skilled at that or felt the need to do it, and some others will contribute the cash or labor, food, so that the bereaved family receives complete emotional support. Now today, if you go and see a bereaved family in Paro, oh no, it is more or less of getting together, you catching up on each other, drinking, having some food, and at times seemingly it looks even like a party, which is not true, right? So that's sort of that really profound Buddhist ethos, culture of really practicing Dharma and consoling the bereaved family in terms of offering prayer support. Of course, there are monks and nuns and local gomshans to conduct rituals, but there are no lay people from the villages who could actually do it. And of course, these practices are dead and gone with the demise of senior members of the community. Young people today, like my generation also, they've forgotten it. So it's quite sad. And the next bit is the Doshu River. Doshu River, those of you who've been to Sengedrak, who have been to for a nice hike at the sacred Chumpu, Chumetpu actually, Chumpu is the corrupted version. Historically speaking, it's called Chumetpu, the abode of Dakini Vajravarahi, Doje Pamo. Very powerful, really blessed site. So if you happen to go to Chimpu, you'll pass by the sacred Dochu, which flows through, flows through Chimpu, right up, right? So Doshu is a sacred river because Doshu actually has its origin right up to Chimpu, to the mountain, glacier mountain up in Chimpu. Then you also have source from Dagepong So, and then source from Rage. And people in Ramna use Doshu as the sacred water to drink for both cattle and themselves. 30 years down the line, modernized, people sold land, resettlers came in, a lot of people from other parts of Bhutan came in. So, Doshu is commercialized, polluted, and then now a new hotel is on construction, so more pollution will happen. So people forgot its sacredness, you see, and now the waste has become a huge issue. A lot of plastic generation, a lot of pollution in terms of human defecation with the construction workers around. So you're forgetting the genesis of Doshu itself. Now to wind up very quickly, right from, as I was saying, to reiterate, right from paddy cultivation to harvesting, peak farming season, labor exchange system, or people working together, communal farming system, to building, to managing your archery matches, guru matches, birth and death rights, looking after the sick, looking after waste issue now. People clean up once a month, communal cleaning, etc. Still there, but is there ownership? This is still an issue. Owner sometimes becomes nobody's business. Everybody passes through these heaps of waste where people from a town area, which is about 15 minutes drive from where the Sharig Yog is located, people just use this as a dump yard. No one's bothering about it. And this local issue has suddenly become national issue, and national issues become international issue. This is why we have Mother Earth in the form of Kovet, Karuna, to teach her unruly, stubborn, greedy children. Thank you very much.